So again, please get any piece of paper. You have access there. Later on, we will try to show that. And then eventually what you're gonna need to do is write your name, and then part one, provide the cycle of family life. So para sa imo, family life starts from instances of marriage. Then after marriage, what would be, you need to look into your family code. Say for instance, what needs to be known, or what needs to be uh, emphasized after marriage. So after marriage, you need to what? Go to, maybe you need to go to understand, uh, say for instance, parental authority ka mo diretso. Oh. So at least siguro at least 5 areas. Say for instance, sarat ka marriage slash parental authority, kaya ano na siya, or kadto ka diretso sa mga airship, mga ano na siya. Okay? Do not just take my word for it. Just look and browse your family code and look at areas wherein these areas would allow you to look the cycle of family life, or family ano ni siya, family relations. It helps because this is going to be your map in trying to understand, um, say for instance, the concepts that we're gonna discuss in a while. Sige. So 3 minutes left. Work on that. At the end of this, I will give them a next instruction. So again, this is just part one. Please, this is a good chance for you to open your family code. Okay? Just look into the family code. What areas are you hoping to, kumbaga, chapters in the life of the family? Sa iban sa inyo, siguro, ma-start niyo siya sa courtship. Okay. I don't know how would you place that. But look into what chapter under the family code yung may ara courtship. Kung gusto niyo mo nang inyo nga pagplasta. Then after courtship, kasi gusto niyo anay ano do yon, children. Okay. Nasula ng marriage, wala ng marriage. So, depende na sa inyo. That's how you want to conceptualize the cycle of a family life. Sige, go. Go. 2 more minutes. Okay. Because if you've tried to open your respective family code, there are at least um, at least 11 titles that you have there. So there's title 1, under title 1, there are respective chapters. After respective chapters, there are sub-chapters. So be able to see just the title lang ganay. Try to open it up. Sorry. So for instance, different titles, and then there are certain chapters. Sige. Browse your family code and then look into areas where you find it. Ano. Okay? Sige. So, on my end, part 2, siguro you try to, say for instance, the exercise right now is, so part 1, so do may part 1 na siya. And then you fold it half. You fold your paper into half. Stop sharing. You fold your paper into half, and then on the lower part, that would be part 2. Okay? So if you're already in part 2, sige, if you're already in part 2, I need you to write down, did you get the instruction under part 1? Say for instance, you can just simply, I'm not asking you to make a diagram. Maybe just enumerate, like part 1, number 1 should be about areas with respect to, if you look into your family code, marriage. So nauna marriage. Marriage, and then ano pa other titles? So, yan. Marriage, marriage, and then parental authority. 3, at least 5 lang ha, at least 5. After parental authority, maybe you would like to look into instances about property relations. Sige. Sige, just scan through your family code. It helps when you try to look into the different titles. Sige. Some of you, basi wala niyo pa na na-open ang inyong family code, you can really look into the different chapters. Actually, my clue to you is to work on the different titles. Say for instance, what is Title 5? What is Title 5? Have you seen what's Title 5? Alejandro, Miguel, what's Title 5 in your family code? Are you there? Kasi wala ang tao.
Attorney. The Title 5 is the family.
Okay, very good. So these are some instances wherein we will, again, this is the approach is conceptual. So look into that. Okay, we can maximize the entire article, the entire code if you're gonna look into that. So maybe for sa imo, it's about the family. Then look about the other titles that you can see. Okay. Say for instance, parang sinade, Hannah, what's Title 8? Title 8, Hannah. Wala. Are you there, Hannah? Ano, Si Hana na ipapasabton ta. Sige. I saw you raising your hand, Shara, pero ano talaga na eh. Hana? Wala? Sige. Okay.
Attorney,
Hmm.
support.
Oh, good. Okay. Sige. Now it's my turn. So, part 2 is how I would how would we approach this conceptuality of the family code. Now, first of all, um, part 2 under number 1 is I need you to write down title 3, which is article 68. We need to approach title 3, article 68. So yeah, let's go to sharing the screen. Oops. Title 3 under article 68 is very important. Why? Before you get married, you need to know this. And that is... Oh, nag-jump siya. Oh, wait. Isa lang, isa lang. Wait. Aring sa paras. Article 68 speaks about, again, I think we've discussed this in principle already. You need to know from the very start what are the various rights and obligations involved in family life. It is so vital that those who are entering into a contract of marriage needs to understand when is marriage to be considered an obligation. When is marriage to be considered as a vital thing? So what is Article 68? Oh, naglala ako. So Article 68 would deal about, again, the particular
Obligation, rights, and
rights and obligations in their family life. So under Article 68, which is Title 3, we're dealing with the duties involved in family relations. Okay? So please know your fundamental. The fundamental here is that a husband and wife are obliged to live together and observe mutual love, respect, fidelity, and render mutual help and support. So these are things which can be demanded by one party to the other. Just like when you're entering into a contract, this is already deemed written into the contract. Though nagambal kabi nga ginpakasal ka, wala man ginpabalo sa imo nga dapat may fidelity. So amo nang iban, they fall short of the understanding of what is marriage. Kahit iban sila, they could not even understand the word mutual love or respect. So again, the exercise is not just one party, but both must render that. So they have been summarized into personal obligations. If you're gonna look and jump into obligations in contract, an obligation is the juridical tie of one person to give, to do, or not to do. So what you need to do is to live together. So it's essential that parties need to live together, yes. Observe mutual love, respect, fidelity, and then render mutual help and support. Now, the duty to live together is highlighted as both a duty and a right. Cohabitation is one of those instances, and if you've read, again, reviewing your Chiming Choy, the sexual intercourse is one of those inherently part of it. Now, can a 75-year-old male who married another 75-year-old female claim for annulment or declaration of nullity by reason that they could no longer have consortium. Well, uh, in some of the principles involved, sexual intercourse is not only the basic thing. So it may not be the court may not look at it as a violation of the cohabitation, which is the duty to live together. So the wife must establish a separate residence or domicile in the following cases. May establish, huh? These are more or less the exception. The wife may what? If the husband continually indulges in illicit relations with others, or if there is concubine. So the wife is being allowed to maintain a separate residence. Uh, but of course, the recourse of the wife is to have the marriage declared annulled by some of the reasons later. Now, um, these are the points that are being raised in Article 68 because again, too many people get into marriage without looking into the personal obligations that needs to be done or fulfilled. If the wife refuses unjustifiably to live with her husband, the court will admonish but not order her to return. Why? Because a personal obligation is something that the court will not uh, force someone if someone has a valid cause or reason not to cohabit anymore. Meaning to say, if the wife doesn't want to stay in their conjugal home, so that can be a reason or a cause for that. But it will not order her to return. Amo nang amo nang awkward nga part because the court can force someone to pay the support, but the court will not force someone to live with someone he or she does not want to live with anymore. Sige. So there is also the duty to observe mutual love, respect, and fidelity. This is change instead of obedience. The law now requires mutual respect. And infidelity may be certain grounds under legal separation, disinheritance, or unworthiness in matters of succession for criminal liability. So, infidelity may be as a ground to file criminal case against your husband or your spouse. Specifically, we have um, VAUSI, the Anti-Violence Against Women. So they can be causes. In other instances, under the revised penal code, infidelity by reason of concubinage or by reason of adultery, they can be a separate criminal act. But in the civil aspect, what you need to do is just simply ask to be removed from the conjugal home and live a separate life wherein in the grounds under legal separation, you would like to evade the first obligation, which is the duty to live together. So it may be granted to you. So the duty among the third class is the duty to render mutual help and support. So marriage, as they say, is a 50-50 proposition. Therefore, there must be mutual help and support. So there are a lot of provisions spread around in the civil code that deals with this about support, but there are emphasis under this. Mutual help includes the right to defend the life and honor of the other spouse. That means that there is the importance to defend family honor. What do you mean by that? Family honor in the sense that if anybody takes advantage of or maligns your wife, you go to the aid of your wife or your husband. Why? Because in Article 11, there is a customary rule in family life. And that is to provide not just a sense of financial security but also the emotional and family life security. So support includes medical assistance for the sick spouse even if the doctor was called by another person. This is a very old case, the Pilayo versus Lauron. The the facts of this case is that the wife here was very sick. The husband was away. And in this instance, the concerned neighbor called for the services of a doctor to help, um, kumbaga, uh, provide medical aid or care for the wife. So naturally, there incurs certain expenses such as professional fee, medical fee for the wife. Ang defense ng husband, kita mo ang klaseng husband, ang basang husband, ang sukton niyo ang neighbor ko. Kaya ang neighbor ko ang nagtawag sang doktor. Siya ya ang nag-avail sang services sang doktor. Ang wife ko ya, beneficiaryo lang na siya. Nami man siyang argument actually, di ba? So imagine nun mo. But the court ruled that because under our family law, the husband needs to provide mutual care and support, mutual help, I mean, it would be the duty of the husband to bear the burdens of the payment. So, not the neighbor. So, grabe na siyang very influential na siyang provision. Mutual help includes moral assistance. In their instances wherein spread throughout the provisions under support that Title 8 that a husband needs to finish if one of the children or including this extends not only to the other spouse but also to the children na because the burden for support is not only carried into the other spouse but also for their children. So if one of the children has already started a vocation, a degree, or a course, the other spouse or any of the spouses are obliged under the law to have that child finish. So medyo ano na siya kaya in actual case there is one family here, they're rich pero because they have already went through the process of annulment, so ginapamangkot sino ang mapadayon paskwela sang iya nga bata nga doktor. So um, kay sino i-charge kumbaga, is it from the husband or to the wife? Then the court adjudged that both needs to, even if mas dako ang salary nga gina-earn sang husband because he's an executive officer, um, the law does not make any distinction who should be. The law imposes that it must be mutually be carried out by both of the spouses. So some other consequences of marriage: marriage emancipates a person from parental authority. Uh, there is a provision under emancipation, meaning when when does emancipation occur? First and foremost, the basic rule is that emancipation occurs upon reaching the age of majority. And then in another instance, emancipation would be carried out by reason that one has already entered into a contract of marriage. So consequences of marriage is that there must be no more parental authority of your parents. Say for instance, ikaw ang nagpakasal, pagpakasal mo, um, kabudlay pa na nga ang parents mo pa ang madiktar sa imo nga how would you live your life. That's why this is also a biblical sense that when you get married, dapat hindi na pagintrahan. The man shall live with his wife and shall be, ano na siya? Na away from his mother and father so that makafocus siya sa iyang family. Uh, Later on, we're gonna discuss the various orientation for marriage. Uh, Number one, there are instances wherein if you are a child right now, you are a family of orientation, and if you get to be your family, like you get to have a wife already or a husband, and then you have children, that becomes your family of procreation. Sige. Who was raising their hand? My question? Yes, Zeno.
Attorney, good evening.
Yes, yes, go.
I would like to ask Bala regarding this emancipation sa support. So, in case a certain daughter marries someone under pa siya be like ginapaskwela sa sang ginikanan niya yung nagdesider sa nga magpakasal.
Okay.
So, does that end the obligation of the parents nga magpaskwela kay tungod nga nagpakasal na siya?
In legal terms, yes. By
Okay.
reason that that is the effect of marriage. It
Opo.
actually seizes parental authority, and including with the parental authority, the duty and obligation to provide support. But of course, kumbaga, the child cannot sue his parents or legally demand na suportaran mo ko gyapon. It's just that this has been a customary rule on our practice that maski kasal ka na, the parents would still continue to provide. But in legal terms, the the full effect of emancipation would be to cease, um, di ba, it's a cultural thing. Sa states gani, when you reach the age of 18, ginapalayas ka na sa balay mo. O pangita na to trabaho, pangita na to lain nga pangabuhian. That's just one of the observance there. Here, of course, culturally, maski kasal ka na, dra gyapon kay nanay, kay tatay, o kay lola mo, sila anay maalaga sang bata, something like that. Because we're dealing with the more economical thing. But the direct answer to that is yes. Emancipation renders no obligation on the part of the parent to continuously support the child. Unless by certain provision, when we're gonna go through the effects of legal separation or the effects of annulment be, the parents are still to observe the finishing of a degree or a vocation for one of the children or any of the children. May corresponding obligation. We're gonna look at that into instances. Again, we're still just on the part one of understanding the cycle. And the cycle is that you need to know the rights and obligations first of what you're getting into when you're trying to get married, establishing your married life. All right. So thank you for that question. So the marriage privilege rule. Um, you have to know that in instances when you are in court, the husband cannot testify against the wife without her consent, his or her consent against her husband also without. So the marital privilege rule or the marriage privilege rule is not found in our civil law, but it's found under the rules of court. So a husband cannot be examined for or against his wife without her consent, nor a wife for or against her husband without his consent. The exception is if it's a case against each other. So, say for instance, si husband nag file kaso sa utod sang babae or sa parents sang babae. And then gingkwa ni husband nga witness, gingkwa sang parents nga witness ang wife ni husband. Technically, when the wife is being called to the witness stand, the husband can claim, Your Honor, under the marital privilege rule, my wife is excluded and not allowed to become a witness for the parents. So you can contest that. Several instances, several cases wherein that would be a consideration to actually prevent someone from testifying or having been part of the court. Sige. Hannah, you have a question?
Later na lang attorney.
Okay. Sige, sige. Thank you. Now, the other effects or consequence of marriage is that there is a marital communication rule. The husband and wife during the marriage or even after the marriage cannot be examined without the consent of the other regarding any communication received in confidence from one from by one from the other during the marriage. So, what does this marital communication rule? In marital communication rule, say for instance, your wife is being called to testify against the husband for information that the husband may have communicated to the wife by reason of his illegal activities. Say for instance, si husband is a drug dealer, drug pusher. Kwaon ko nga witness, kwaon sang state nga witness ang iya nga wife, kay gahambal ang wife nga there is an instance wherein gahambal ang iyang husband nga ang iya nga supplier is this prominent person in Bacolod, kuno abi, something like that. Under the marital communication rule, uh, the wife is precluded or prevented from testifying things that she might have personal knowledge or acquired information by reason that it was confided by the husband to him or her. Why is that? Because the two basic rules under marriage privilege rule and marital communication rule is number one, to protect the sanctity of the marriage, whether the marriage still exists or not, and to actually seal the lips of the spouses that the affairs that they have is in private for each other. Um, Justice Isagani Cruz has eloquently wrote this ruling as this is this is a principle not just to close the lips of the parties but to close ano na siya? Ano to galing term niya? Uh, Basta the term is mapollute or something, makontaminate, yeah. Not to contaminate the relations of the spouses. So, well, the issue again here is that this is to prevent discord among the family, or even if there's discord in the family, um, there are exemptions to the rules, but it has to be invoked. Meaning you have to claim it. So kay pareho na, you're in court, you're in practice, and then the other party would call on the witness, would call the wife as the witness. If patulog-tulog yung lawyer sang piyak, namba lang siya nga, okay, so calling on the witness of the other side, wala siya nag-object, then it would constitute as a waiver on your part to listen to the testimony of the wife. Pero kung abtik na yung lawyer, mamba siya, Your Honor, this is a violation under the marital privilege rule. So the court would give its ruling a yes. This is, under the circumstance, this is not allowed. So you really have to, invoke on that. Now, the wife should use the husband's surname, but there is a recent decision for this that the wife may maintain and consider to use and maintain her surname without need of adopting the husband's surname. This is more or less a tradition lang gid niya. Right? Sige. So, other principles that involved in rights is the husband and the wife shall fix their family domicile. In case of disagreement, who shall decide? It shall be decided by the court. So the court may accept one spouse from living with the other if the latter should live abroad or there are other valid and compelling reasons for the exemption. However, such exemptions shall not apply if the same is not compatible with the solidarity of the marriage. So, part of this, Article 69 is already the example of living together. Kung sa mga, sige na lang, sa mga mnemonics ng iban, living together, sexual intercourse. Article 69 is very vital para sila. So, ma-set nila ang example. So, instances where wife is justified of to leave the husband and thereby select her own domicile. The husband lives as a vagabond. Or what is a vagabond? Anyone? Bambla, wala income, wala pangabuhian. If the husband maltreats her, pwede. If the husband insists on his immoderate or barbaric demands from the wife for sexual intercourse, pwede niya bayaan. There is, again, now a thing such as marital, right? If the wife is asked by the husband to leave the conjugal place, threatening to use violence upon her if should return home. If the husband commits concubinage and continuously indulges in such illicit relationship. Notice, tanan sinade, ang lalaki, gidya tanan na may salaw. Lalaki, wala ka income. Lalaki, ginamaltreat mo wife mo. Lalaki, ka barbaric sa imo. Ang lalaki, gina-threaten mo yung mga wife. Ang lalaki, ga-commit sa concubinage. This also applies if the woman also does that to the husband. Okay? Such is a reality. All right. Now, let's go to 70. So the spouses are jointly responsible for support of the family. The expenses for such support and other conjugal obligations shall be paid from the community property and, in the absence thereof, from the income or fruits of their separate properties. In case of insufficiency or absence of said income or fruits, such obligations shall be satisfied from their separate properties. Ladies and gentlemen, Article 70 is already telling you about mutual help and support, and it's also giving you the hierarchy of sources of funds to be used to support the family. Meaning, it's going to give you the idea about what kind of property regimes exist. Say, for instance, support other than the conjugal from the community property, meaning properties that are owned in common by both spouses. Husband and wife, they own it in common, drakwaon. Next are the incomes and fruits. I have a separate property, but that separate property is earning certain income. Say, for instance, I have a land and that land has a building. That building is being rented out. That becomes part of the proceeds. This is where the very concept of the conjugal partnership of gains. Meaning, ang tanang nga ginansya mo, maski separate pa na, but when we're gonna deal with property relation, this is where it's very vital. When did you acquire the property? If you acquire the property before you got married, that property is yours exclusively. Okay? Now, if you got married within the sakasal, you acquired property, the presumption under the law is that any property you acquired during the marriage is owned in common between the parties. This is notwithstanding whether the property regime is absolute community or conjugal partnership. But this is just the general concept. So in instances wherein before your marriage, you have a property that is being owned by you, and you're bringing that property within that marriage, ask yourself, are we supposed to consider that as absolute community? Yes, because When you are entering into a marriage without a prenuptial agreement, then this becomes now owned in common. What is owned by her or what is owned by you is together. But say for instance, if the default property regime is conjugal partnership, what remains to be yours before the marriage will still be yours during the marriage, but ang mga income, sales, or any profit that you can derive from that property is not exclusively owned by you, but it will be for both. That's why conjugal partnership of gains means tanan lang nga profit, tanan lang nga the help within the proceeds will be owned in common. Then the last one, the kind of property regime, is the separate property. We will have full length discussion for that, but that would be including already sa next discussions. Yeah. I have a work assignment for that regarding property regimes. The assignment for that involves um, comparing and contrasting the different property regimes. Anyways, sige. Proceeding wise, these are the sources for the support and expenses. Community property, income and fruits, and then separate properties. This is how you're going to manage the expenses for support and the various conjugal obligations. So the management of the household shall be the right and duty of both spouses. This is under Article 71. The expenses of such management shall be paid in accordance with the provisions under Article 70. The hierarchy: community property, income property, and their separate properties. Now, 72 and 73, more or less, this would involve like when one of the spouses neglects his or her duty to the conjugal union, commits acts which tend to bring danger, dishonor, or injury to the other, the aggrieved party may apply relief from court. What do you mean by relief from the court? This means that the other party can either ask the court to either compel one to, number one, except for living together, compel the other party from providing support if needed. Um, if there is a pending obligation such as to surrender properties belonging to both parties, then consider it done also. The court can still enforce that. 73 naman niya, the more or less the insight here is either spouse may exercise any legitimate profession. So sources of income mo towards the family is not just your property or the real estate that you have, but also the occupation that you have or the profession that you're exercising. It may also be the business or activity without the consent of the other. You can exercise that. So you can ask for a profession, occupation, business. Kung nagani nga sa iban, uh, pigado na sila pero ma-pride ang husband. Bubuhayin kita kahit na igapang ko pa kayo sa hirap. Oh, grabe na mga teleserye. Ang concept nila is that one, you do not need to work. But in all intents and purposes, now that you've discovered Article 73 of the Family Code, it states there, I can still do business without your consent. I can still execute a profession without your consent. Because again, the law protects the equal opportunity for both spouses. So there are instances that there are moral reasons involved. So the latter or any of the spouses may object to the kind of profession. Say for instance, si Mrs. mo ara sa din siya. Typical na sa teleserye bla, gasaot-saot na bla, mga agogo dancer, or GRO. So I know you can relate. You've seen this in so many teleserye. So galing kay Ting Iban, uh, ang ano ba, ang husband is into prostitution. Siya husband pa prostitution. Ano occupation niya. Or ang business ng husband is he's the pimp. So for moral or valid, basta serious nga ground, you can always try to object to that. So what happens if there is a disagreement? In case of disagreement, it is the court who shall decide whether the objection is proper. Say for instance, nga object ka, si Juan ga object, Your Honor, ang wife ko GRO. So there is a moral reason for that. Siyempre, masabat ang judge. Ang GRO is just a guest relations officer. Wala lang do ga-entertain ng storya-storya. No. Kaya si Judge Permedra sa iyang establishment, ginastorya niya si Mrs. mo. Di ba may kaso? Muna ganun, may interest si Judge over it. But nonetheless, the court will determine whether it is proper or not. The court will also check whether there is a benefit that can really be achieved towards the exercise of a profession, occupation, business, or activity. So if the benefit accrue prior to the objection, the resulting obligation shall be enforced against the separate property of the spouse who has not obtained consent. So in Article 73, paragraph 2, number 2, it's going to tell you what would be the instances. There is a prior objection and after objection. So if the benefit accrued prior to the objection, meaning to say, if ang benepisyo gasulod, wala ka pa nag-object, and then nag-object ka because sinada, ang result is that whatever the losses that it may be nga himuod niya, it will be taken into account to the separate property of the spouse who has not obtained the consent. As an example, wife nag-business, business siya alahas. Wala siya nakakobtain sang consent. Alahas di mamaligya ka alahas, alahera ka. There's nothing wrong with selling jewelry. And when you're selling jewelries, there's risk involved because ang iban sinada hindi tanan makabayad right away. Now, in instances like this, if napirdi ang negosyo, kung napirdi ang negosyo, it is borne by both of the spouses. But say for instance, ganegosyo ka sang alahas, nag-object ang husband because the husband knows for a fact that these jewelry are GSM, galing sa magnanakaw. Malinis sa mga snatcher sa downtown, halin sa mga snatcher sa mga simbahan. And he made proper objections. And eventually the wife obtains losses for it. All the losses will be carried out and be a burden of that spouse who did not obtain the consent. Okay? I hope that's clear to you. Why? Because you're protecting only the profit supposed to be of the conjugal partnership. So there's a more concrete example under paragraph 2, but I'll reserve that to your quiz. But in this instance, please be mindful of Article 73, number 2, because benefits that accrue prior to the objection or thereafter are still those that can be disregarded by the court, or are those instances that will have certain consequences if the court will uh, uphold that there is a valid objection. Okay? All right. So that's part of the instance under Title 3. Now, on part 2, number 2, what do you think would be the next cycle naman for the husband and wife? What would be the next cycle? The next cycle there is you need to go through the family, which is title number 5. I need you to go to the family. In general, you're supposed to go to title 1 already. Title 1 is supposed to be going to talk about marriage. So now that you've known what are the obligations, sige, Ariane, what's your question?
Attorney, we just want to remind na it's almost time and Doc Chu is waiting for us.
Ah,
That's all.
What time do you have? 7:27 pa lang sa akin.
Okay.
Sige,
That's all, attorney.
okay. No worries. Sige. Can you take a picture of your respective charts or your respective activity and then post it to our group chat because that merits a corresponding points for your activity. Right?
One pa lang ni attorney, no? Wala ka.
Yun lang, just maintain that because in the end of it, you'll also get to complete the part 2, which is for you to compare part 1 and part 2. Ideally, how would you look at the cycle of family life? Right? Sige. So post that piece of paper that you've made today. Okay? So I'll let you go so that you can go to Doc Chu. Live Jesus in our hearts.
Forever. Thank you, attorney.
Attorney.
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you, thank you.
Attorney. May question ko kay attorney, wait lang.
Oh, anong question mo, Shara?
May ano bala part 1 bala attorney, pwede nga nag-base pagid ko sa chapters. Wala lang ako nag-focus sa title.
Wala kasi. No
Thank you,
problem.
attorney.
Sige lang. Post ha, post.